Welcome to the inaugural podcast of Talking Water Honestly. I want to thank our Executive Director and CEO of Louisville MSD, Mr. Tony Parrott, for the opportunity to execute his vision of gathering experts in the water sector to share their challenges, solutions, and lessons learned. My name is Zonetta English, Strategic Initiatives and Project Delivery Director at MSD. Also, I have the esteemed pleasure of leading the utility management community of the Water Environment Federation. Talking Water Honestly's mission is to develop content to assist utilities across the U.S. to solve their water challenges and share their expertise. This investment will save our organization critical resources and provide small utilities access to vital information. In addition, these conversations provide an avenue for our ratepayers to gain insight to the intricate and complicated issues we face in providing critical services to our communities and introduce you to an array of dedicated water professionals. Welcome. I would ask Mr. Parrott to provide some introductory remarks and introduce the focus of our discussion today on odor control challenges and best practices. Then he'll hand it over to Jamie Decker, Senior Associate with Hazen and Sawyer, to facilitate our discussion today.
Thank you, Zonetta. Thank you, Zonetta, and thank you all for joining us for a discussion around a very serious issue that is being impacting water, wastewater, primarily utilities across America. And it is the issue of either the existence of odors or odor complaints in our communities. One of the things that we want to be able to do today is really just talk honestly about the presence of odors in sewer systems and communities, and why in some instances they may be occurring, and how different approaches are being used by utilities across the country to address odors within a combined sewer system, those systems that carry wastewater and stormwater at the same time, and separate sanitary sewer systems that serve so many communities across America. We know that there are different types of odors in our community, and we know that utilities are taking different approaches in terms of trying to either treat or mitigate odor complaints in our cities and in our counties. We wanted to make sure that we got a broad perspective because, as you all know, it's not just one city or one county or one state or one region. Odors are innate within the sewer treatment process, whether that be in the pipes that carry wastewater to our treatment plants or the pump stations or the treatment plants themselves. The nature of our business is to treat wastewater, and odors are innate in our systems. But we are all committed to make sure that we are being responsive partners in our community and making sure that we are addressing odor complaints in our community as well. But in talking honestly, we all should let you know that odors are always going to exist within the operations of a wastewater system. But as utility professionals, we have the ability to not only educate you, but to inform you of all the progresses that is being made in terms of best practices of treating odors in combined sewer systems and separate sanitary sewer systems across the country. In a lot of our large urban cities, we know that a lot of us have been under what we call federal consent decrees. And there's been a lot of work in terms of installing deep wet weather tunnels, and also a lot of expansions into our wastewater treatment plants, and also a lot of improvements to address aging infrastructure across America. We know that there are a lot of things that we've done regulatorily to address pretty much mitigating combined sewer overflows or eliminating sanitary sewer overflows, and we've invested a lot of time and money in that. But there may be unintended consequences, or there may be other things that are happening within our system that we also need to recognize as a priority for us to address as well. But the issue is how do we make sure that we are communicating to the public, and what strategies are we using to interact with the public and inform them of the improvements and the mitigation strategies that we are putting in place. So I hope that you enjoy this podcast because you're going to get a variety of perspective from across America. And we hope that this is not only helpful for your employees, but also helpful for your community and your political stakeholders as well. So with that, welcome. And Jamie, I will turn it over to you.
And again, thank you all for being part of this, important discussion. To start off today, I just want to again thank Louisville MSD for being part of this, as well as the city of Lexington, DC Water, Milwaukee MSD, and just want to have the folks from each of those utilities just do a quick introduction of themselves and just give a brief overview of their odor control program and what they're facing briefly. And then we'll dive into a discussion looking at some of those issues that we're all experiencing, as well as the best practices with that. So with that, I'm going to would like Charlie Martin with the City of Lexington to.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here. Lexington is actually, it's a merged government, merged city-county government. The county consists about of 285 square miles, but only 85 of it is actually urban. So small part of it urban, most of it rural. 97% though are in that urban area, what we call an urban service area. And one of the things that's unique about Lexington is we sit on a hill, basically a dome, and everything flows away from us. Unlike most communities who have a river or a lake or something in between, and we don't have that. And so what ends up happening is we have 8 drainage areas, 2 treatment plants, 75 pump stations, and nearly 100 miles of force mains. Those are big, big contributors to what all our odor problems really are. We've been treating odors like most of everybody here on the call since the beginning. I mean, it's a focus at the treatment plants. It's focus at the pump stations. We feed chemical as well to try to be able to mitigate that. But starting last year, things really kind of hit the wall. Things went off the chain, and so I'm really glad to be here today to hopefully be able to share what we're learning, but also learn from the others as far as what we can do to try to be better.
Thank you, Charlie. Next, I'd like Iaso and Shauna from DC Water to introduce themselves.
Thank you, Jamie, for inviting me. I'm Iaso Yilma. I am working for DC Water and managing a multi-jurisdictional asset called Potomac Interceptor. It runs from Dallas Airport all the way to DC and 50 miles long. We have 6 odor control facilities, and in addition to that, also we manage ventilation control vault of the Clean River projects, close to 26 of them. Thank you.
Thanks, Iasu. I'm Shauna Martinelli. I'm the acting director of operations and process engineering at Blue Plains. That's what we refer to the wastewater treatment plant as. So you'll hear me say Blue Plains throughout. So here on our footprint, we actually have 9 Chapter 2 air permits to construct and operate odor control systems, which are specific to process areas across the plant. And these mostly consist of wet scrubbers, carbon scrubbers. The permits themselves require us to operate and maintain specific removal efficiencies of common odor constituents, so hydrogen sulfide, reduced sulfur compounds, and in some cases, depending on the area, actually removing ammonia as well. So we demonstrate this compliance through, it depends on the system, sample collection, performance testing, maintaining certain operating parameters, pH and ORP of those wet scrubbers in those systems. And so the majority of those permits were actually applied for as the plant expanded across the years, and there were a few that were applied for as refurbishments or improvements were made. We're unique here at Blue Plains in that we are actually above the potential to emit pollutants major source threshold, which requires us to have a Title V air permit of the Clean Air Act. In the district in DC, they actually refer to Chapter 2 permits. Those are minor source air permits. And then Chapter 3 are major source air permits. That's their nomenclature here. And we're still waiting to receive the final version of our Title V. We did receive a pre-notification draft last spring. That's a very large document. We're a very large campus, very large system. So Something that I'm looking forward to gaining from this discussion is most recently in the district itself, there was a rulemaking that's Chapter 9, Section 903. It's a regulation in the district as of August 2023. And it focuses specifically on odorous or nuisance air pollutants. So in speaking with the Department of Energy and the Environment, they've indicated to us that the intent is to require listed stationary sources. So those sources are what you would imagine them to be: trash transfer stations, asphalt plants, solid fuel fired cooking operations, ourselves as wastewater treatment facilities and systems. That's what they listed as. So it applies to EASU and pumping and sewer as well. So it requires the listed sources to prepare an odor control plan that will just generically mitigate odors. We're currently working on a DC Water wide odor control plan to be submitted. The unfortunate part about this rule is that it has language in it regarding dilutions to threshold of 2 to 1. So essentially, if a field inspector uses an olfactor meter to detect a dilution of 2 to 1, regardless of the source, it will require that source to also develop and submit an odor control plan. So at Blue Plains, we've done odor surveys, primarily in 2012, 2013, where we were looking at dilutions to threshold of 7 to 1 on our fence line specifically. So even though DOEE has indicated to us that we require an OCP because of what we do, and that this 2 to 1, it's not a metric, we don't need to meet it. We're really concerned as an organization about public scrutiny of this and how they interpret that new regulation. We're concerned about how that will be perceived. And so, as I mentioned, this is really an ongoing development for us. We're still preparing our plans to be submitted. And so hopefully we can learn a lot from this dialogue as other utilities have navigated these issues.
Thank you, Shauna. That's great. Pat, would you like to start off to introduce Milwaukee MSD?
Sure. Patrick Obanoff. I'm operations and maintenance here at the Milwaukee Metropolitan Sewerage District. We cover Milwaukee County and some of the suburbs beyond that, about 1.1 million people. We are just responsible for the interceptor sewers. So all the municipalities have their own sewers. We're the freeway system of the sewerage system over here. But we have about 300 miles of collector sewers, as well as about 30 miles of deep tunnel. The deep tunnel is where a lot of our odors are, but we do have a couple pump stations in our collection system. And yeah, that's, as EASU pointed to, those are definitely a major source for odors. We have 2 wastewater treatment plants where we also have a lot of constructed facilities to help mitigate odors. Some in better condition, some better operating condition than others. And we also have been relatively active, I'll say, in trying to proactively address odors. So we live in an area where predominantly the winds blow our odors from our treatment plants over the lake, where they don't impact anybody. But occasionally we get the wind in the opposite direction. So we proactively watch for that. And when that condition occurs, we feed ferric chloride to kind of knock that odor down and proactively go out and monitor it and see how well that's working. We're also trying to be proactive as far as when we do diversions in the collection system or maintenance work at the plants that may cause odors. We actively try to assess what those odor impacts might be and communicate with our commission, our local representatives, and the public about what's going to happen. And we also obviously try to be reactive to complaints that come into us and make sure we address those and talk to the public about what's happening. Bill, do you want to just say, I'm sorry, Bill Graffin from Milwaukee Metropolitan Sewerage District is also here. Bill, do you want to quickly introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi everyone. Bill Graffin, Public Information Manager with Milwaukee Metropolitan Sewage District. I handle communications, media relations, drafts of most of our news releases, that kind of stuff, and have been here for 22 years now, so I've gotten my share of calls and complaints about odors, and we do the best we can to be transparent and let people know what's going on and how long it may last and those kind of things. So we've had quite a bit of experience in this area, but we're still fine tuning and we're still coming up with the bigger, better mousetrap as well.
Great. Thank you, Bill. Mr. Parrott, would you like just to give a quick overview of, Louisville MSD and your odor control program?
Yeah, Jamie. In Louisville, as I mentioned, we are we have a combined sewer utility, and as well as, a separate sanitary system. And we also do flood protection here in the city of Louisville, which sometimes impacts the combined sewer system as well. But we have always had odors within our combined sewer system and in the separate system as well. But as our infrastructure has aged, we know that there's specific parts of our city, particularly in the urban core of our city, where we have the combined sewer with either catch basins that are not working properly or were not even installed with the ability to have the air gaps or the air caps to make sure that air from the odors from the system can't get out into neighborhoods. And so over the last couple of years, we have actually been receiving an enormous amount of odor complaints within the combined sewer system and within our wastewater treatment plant, which is the largest treatment plant in the state of Kentucky. And we have been developing a odor control master plan, working with our local air pollution control district. The first phase of that master plan has been completed in terms of documentation. Now we are looking at how we are going to put timelines and cost and expectations to certain recommendations that are a part of that odor control master plan. The biggest challenge that we are seeing is that because of the dry or drought season that we have from summer to the end of fall, those odors are ramping up. And we have tried to be proactive in trying to respond to odors and get information out to the public. And we have actually started a public messaging campaign 3 years ago called Clarity. And that was to be an educational tool, but also to be a tool that we would also get information out to the public, to where we were asking folks, if you smell something, call us. And we think that that has had some unintended consequences, because now that we've raised awareness, two things: we are getting calls. And then the second thing is that because of our public outreach campaign, we think we have bought every odor in our city, and regardless if it's an odor, sewer odor or not. And so that's a challenge for us. And so we're starting to get a lot of, I guess you could say, interest and concern from our political stakeholders. And we're really starting to see our local air pollution control district ramp up their regulatory communications with us. And so we are going to have to do even more than what we've already done in terms of prioritizing odors in our city. And most recently, we've hired an odor czar that is working with our team to not only look at problems within the collection system or the combined sewer system, but how do we make sure that H2S and other things don't get to a level to where it's an impact in our system? And also, how are we going to be able to prioritize those improvements that are really going to bring value? We can all say that we're going to do more and we're going to invest a lot of capital dollars, but we also know, talking honestly, odors are always going to exist in a sewer system. And so how do we demonstrate from a progressive standpoint that we are doing things, that we're being responsive, but we're not wasting those valuable capital dollars to make sure that folks understand that we're taking their complaints seriously? I can tell you that we are now branding June the 1st through the end of November as odor season. Just as we do on our flood control system, we have a flood control season. So we're going to be branding June 1st through the end of November as odor control season, so that we let folks know that there's going to be odors, and these are the things that we need them to do, and communicate the things that we're going to be doing for them. One of the things that we don't want to be the perception out to the community is that we don't care. Because when you think about the locations where a lot of odors are occurring in our system, we don't want to deal with any potential risk for someone to have a environmental justice claim against our utility, or to make sure that people don't think that because they do get odors that it's impacting their health. And so those are very, very vital issues that as public utilities we need to take very seriously. And I can reassure you that here in Louisville, we are doing just that.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Parrott, and all for those introductions. I think, as everyone can see, we've got a broad spectrum of utilities from across the country, both combined and separate systems, and a number of different kind of odor control related issues, and a lot of different solutions that have been effective for everyone. So we're going to move into more discussion here. Talking about both, some of the technical solutions that have been effective for everybody, as well as, some of the other challenges that they've experienced, those complaints, and then also how do we effectively communicate? I think that's been another resonating theme that I heard from everyone, is just how do we get in front of these things? How do we communicate to your residents and the community and to your stakeholders about the things you're doing? So I guess to start off, are there specific, whether constructed solutions or chemical solutions or other things that you guys have found to be most effective? Is there something that, again, that from your experience has worked better than others?
Well, I think you really have to be focused on what kind of loadings that you're putting on a piece of equipment. What we have found is that what works in the springtime doesn't always necessarily work in the hot period of summer or as peak season, as Tony identified. And so we're still trying to work through that. Is that, lies that my testing thing tells me is that it tells me in the springtime that I'm only having to treat 50 parts per million of hydrogen sulfide, when in fact I really have to load that for 500. So finding technology that has a broad spectrum of loading rates, and then also one that can work in all seasons, is particularly interesting, of importance to Lexington. We don't have really deep winters here, probably like Milwaukee does. Actually today it's almost 70 degrees, and Tony, unfortunately, today is odor season, because I got a whole bunch of calls this morning when I got out of bed. So, having it to where it works in all seasons is really, really important thing to consider.
Yeah, thanks, Charlie. Others?
Yeah, I mean, I'll echo that it kind of depends on your loadings and the situation, right? Like for us, where I talked about our treatment plants, the majority of the time we don't have to worry about odors. It's more sporadic. So we've chosen to mostly use chemical because it's very easy to turn on and off. And it's not a big capital, there's no capital work there. We already have everything in place to be able to feed it. But where our one large pump station and collection system is, where it's kind of a continuous odor, and there's a house, right next to us, 15 feet from us, where we used to have a lot of complaints. Yeah, we had to put in a carbon system that we have to change the media all the time. It's a regular loading, like same like Charlie, 50 parts per million or so regular loading, and that works well in that application. But for high loadings, other places, it's very unique. What odor control solution will be effective and, be able to actually maintain the cost, because some of these can be, really crazy if you got to change media a lot, because it gets, saturated with the H2S, and it doesn't do any good anymore. We've found that in some places too.
Okay, we have a different experience in DC. Originally, we were planning to have the odor control facility to remove hydrogen sulfide with activated carbon, and that was successful, removing hydrogen sulfide or the rotten egg smell. But the problem is our pipe is very long, and the pipe generates DMS, the rotten cabbage smell. So once we finish constructing the odor control facility, we start to receive odor complaint because we remove one type of odor, but the other starts coming up, and we don't have a solution at that time. What type of second layer of media we have to use, and we have to establish our own lab to test which of the media is really functioning in one of our odor control facility. Then we found out pure aerate or permanganate, if you know by name, and then when we tried to implement across the entire odor control facilities, the issue of money is also important. So there are many suppliers. What we did was we identified a lab in Florida, and we requested all the suppliers to send their media 10 pound to that lab, and the result should be sent to us. So that lab exposed all the type of medias to same type of humidity, air velocity, and everything, loading and everything. Then we found out one of the 60 media tested was performing in terms of load and even money. And that's what we're trying to do. But to remove hydrogen sulfide, the activated carbon is working good, but the permanganate was required to remove the DMS or protein substance or rotten cabbage smell.
Interesting. What did they use to test that in the lab in Florida? They didn't have your actual odors. They had something else that they substituted?
No, yeah, this is something substituted, and they expose the same velocity, loading, and everything. Yeah.
Have there been other either limitations on chemicals you guys have used that you've experienced, or other ones that you've tried and haven't worked as well?
Yeah, we haven't an issue regarding the chemicals, but we have issue with humidity because we have the mist eliminator ahead of the vessel. When the mist eliminator is not working, the humidity can migrate into the system, and it can affect the performance. It might create hole. It can harden, and the air can be pass through the media without being treated, and those type of issues we have. But once we identify in our own lab what type of chemical we have to use, once we check the performance and everything about the chemical, we're good. But still, we're working also on the loading and speed, contact time, and we have to also install VFD to control the speed. Those type of issues, I call them related to maintenance, was very important. Yeah.
Yeah.
I know that typically folks are opposed to wet scrubbers, but we've actually had pretty good success with single and dual stage wet scrubbers using sodium hydroxide and sodium hypochlorite to remove our most odorous locations. So we use that in our grit screen and loading stations at the headworks of the plant. And it's funny because the technology works well for us to mitigate odors, but we're always managing on the maintenance side, dealing with the hardness that falls out on these vessels. So
Right.
these throughputs that we're looking at are really high. We use plant service water or effluent. We add lime as part of our process. And so that is going to fall out in hardness once you do that pH adjustment at the front end of the plant. And so I know I've spoken to a lot of facilities that dislike the use of these chemical scrubbers, but they actually have proven to be pretty reliable for us. We have 4 of them across the plant in different locations, and the thing that we manage the most is actually the issue with hardness. So we use an acid cleaning program, and we actually piloted a few different systems. We have essentially dual systems. East and west of our headworks are essentially identical, but they have slightly different loading. So we were able to see what worked best for us. Does a recirculation of that odor scrubber sump work better to mitigate hardness, right? Because a lot of these service manuals are from 1940, 1950. We've refurbished these units, but they don't really go into the details of how to keep these scrubbers running. And for us, our biggest issue has been actually managing that hardness. But now we've developed a schedule where we do an acid cleaning based on our experience. It's in our CMMS system, and we've been able to keep up with it. And that has alleviated a lot of our starts and stops, our downtime previously, which was actually just managing the use of our service water in these applications, because you're not going to get around the need to increase the pH to be able to do that removal of H2S.
Yeah.
So
that's good.
I will agree with Shauna. They work very effectively. Lexington's problem has been with them. Number one is that the guys who maintain them, or gals, don't like dealing with the chemicals. They get very intimidated with handling them and stuff because of the risk associated with it. So maintenance sometimes gets deferred longer than it should. And then also, as I mentioned before, the weather situation or preventing freezing. We've had them outside, and so you have to basically shut it down in November and then not bring it back up until April the following year. And there's days like today where it gets warm, everybody comes outside, and shockingly enough, that the odors are the first thing they see. But I agree that if you can get a scrubber that is in the right situation and has a good maintenance support system with it, they can be more effective than most odor control stuff that we've experienced.
yeah, so unfortunately for us, because these are permitted systems, they have to run all the time, 24/7. Any unit that has downtime, any component essential to that. So, there are 9 systems, the number of assets across them. We actually log everything, and we have to provide DOEE letter notification of planned maintenance and corrective maintenance. So 48 hours before we do, say, an acid cleaning or a PM schedule, we'll actually notify DOEE of the duration and the intent, and we log it. And to be honest, I think that level of compliance and visibility has given us the buy-in we need across our different trades to really focus on that, right? Because this is permit compliance. We treat it like our NIPD's permit and such that, so there's this accountability that works out for us, but getting to that point did take years. I mean, because a lot of these systems, they were old, but some of them didn't have permits to start. We applied for them as we refurbished them. And so, but we're in a good place. I know the wet scrubbers get a bad reputation. I actually really dislike using caustic sodium hydroxide. In general, it's clear and odorless and has its implications with it, but we've just done a lot of training, and that layer of accountability has helped us. I actually prefer them over our carbon scrubbers. If we have the same problem, we actually, where we have a carbon installation, we have a lower loading rate. And so we do carbon exchanges based on the lifespan of the carbon and not the adsorption capacity of the carbon. So I think it's funny how it depends on your experience, really, like what works for you and what doesn't.
Right. Yeah, that's very true. Just your specific situation and how you're using it and the loadings that you're experiencing, what works the best. Any other comments on the chemical side of things?
Shauna, would you mind repeating where you said you had 4 scrubbers, where the locations are, or what type of process area?
Yeah. So our most odorous areas are grit screen and loading stations. And so those have something like 16 odor control fans on the various process areas to maintain vacuum, and then run through large wet scrubbers. So those are our east and west headworks, our grit screen and loading stations, and those are wet scrubbers. So we're using sodium hydroxide and sodium hypochlorite in those applications. And then we have similar setups, but 2 stages in our dewatered sludge loading facility. So that's our dewatering part of the solids process, and then our final dewatering facility. So they are almost duplicate systems. They're essentially treating odors from our solids handling. The dewatered sludge loading facility is essentially everything related to the final stages of dewatering. And then final dewatering is just our belt press area. And so those are, again, large 2-stage systems. The first stage actually is meant to remove ammonia. And we were at one point using sulfuric acid for that removal. And then the second stage is a duplicate of our grit screening loading stations using hypo and caustic for removal of hydrogen sulfide and reduced sulfur compounds. We've actually done some pretty extensive sampling, and we demonstrated that we are able to meet our removal efficiencies without the need for the sulfuric acid, because we actually don't have that high strength of an ammonia load going to our first stage of scrubbers. So essentially, we were meeting our ammonia removal at our discharge without using sulfuric acid. We had a difficult time maintaining the sulfuric acid operation because the loading rates were so small. So we had these really tiny peristaltic hose pumps supplying a tiny amount of chemical to this large air treatment, air handling system. And so we did a series of testing. We submitted that to DOEE, and essentially we do sampling. And if we're ever above a trigger or a threshold, we would have to get that first stage back up and running. We haven't had much problem with ammonia. And then we have several carbon units that treat our tunnel dewatering pump station, our enhanced clarification facility. Those are associated with wet weather treatment. So what's coming from our tunnel, those are carbon systems, pretty standard. Huge mist eliminators, ginormous mist eliminators that we hot pressure wash routinely.
Yeah.
And then we have a methanol scrubber, which is just water, because we do add methanol for our additional carbon source. And then we have a whole permitted combined heat and power facility. Don't worry about that.
So obviously with all of those items, you know, and what you all experience, there's obviously a lot of cost involved with odor control. And how do you guys communicate with your decision makers and with your ratepayers about the cost of these programs and, you know, the value of that, or just even the level of odor control removal that they are seeing, for them to better understand those costs?
You know, I will start. You know, as I said before, we've already started our campaign on trying to educate the community on what we are doing. You know, we have already done a lot on our systems, particularly with our combined sewer system long-term control plan, where we've installed maybe 6 underground storage basins with another 4.5 miles of deep water tunnel and a lot of other improvements at our treatment facilities in response to our long-term control plan. A lot of those facilities we designed with the ability to expand for odor control. And now that all those projects are done, we can say that we made a big mistake. We should have included the design for odor control on those facilities, because now we're going back and having to do that. And when you talk about the capital costs associated with that, it's significant. So when you add in the cost of adding odor control on the back end of those type of improvements, and now as we are doing a thermal hydrolysis process for biosolids at our largest treatment plant, we're putting the odor control in the design and making folks understand that that is very costly and that it takes time to get the scale of those type of projects done. It's not going to happen overnight, that it's going to take time. But the investments that we're making now in odor control is significant. I would say it's approaching just at our treatment plants and our EQ basins that we are probably going to spend well over $50 million, and then add in maybe another $50 million just to address those catch basins within the combined sewer system that aren't working, or didn't even have the ability. They weren't capped back when they were installed, maybe 7,500 years ago. And so $100 million, well over $100 million of need just for odor control itself. And then how do you work that into all the other regulatory requirements that we have, and those that are going to be coming down the pipe in the future? And so we've got to make some tough decisions as a utility and as a community. Are we going to be willing to support your utilities to make all of the competing decisions that are necessary, not only to address a level of service on the water and the wastewater side, but how do we deal with those air quality issues and those community value issues that folks want to pay, want to have, and they're going to have to pay for it. So I think we are at a critical point, and I've told our team internally that actually we're at an existential point because we have got to be able to demonstrate progress, but we also know that there is a cap in everything that we do from a financial perspective. And talking honestly, that's the reality. You could probably throw a lot of money at this, but the understanding that odors will always exist in a sewer system has to be communicated, and that folks need to understand that utilities do take it very seriously, and we're doing everything we can to stay on top of it.
I have a question actually related to that. Have you had any conversations or messaging relating to the potential inequity of addressing an odor that is specific to, like, one of your ratepayers is going to observe a favorable or a positive response, whereas a whole nother service area that may not be impacted? Like, have you talked about that at all or had to navigate that language? Because it's something that we think about, but I'm not sure how you say that messaging.
Yeah, we're actually talking about it right now as we elevate our conversations with the Air Pollution Control District that's putting more pressure on us. As I said, you can throw a lot of money at this, and then there's some sectors of the community that are going to see vast improvement, and then there's some sectors that it's probably going to stay pretty much the same. And how do you balance that from a competing perspective of environmental justice? And the message itself, I think, has to be intertwined with what is realistic and what are the facts versus what we are required to do. And I think as long as people think that you are not only listening and you are providing them with the facts, and that you're definitely doing what you're required to do, it definitely will reduce the risk in the future that you're going to be faced with some type of a class action lawsuit or some other issue because of this disparity between the levels of service or whatever that you're providing to each and every customer across the district.
It's hard to articulate to people the point of diminishing returns in something like this. Is that when we had our consent decree came about, I was able to articulate how much money we would be able to spend to handle a higher design storm. Is that you could handle another half of inch of rain for $300 million. Everybody went, okay, I get that, and we've got to somehow figure out how to message this as well. We feed chemical in the collection system at various pump stations and all that. And we're approaching about $800,000 a year in chemical costs. But I'm trying to set up a monitoring program that demonstrates is that you could keep turning that up, and the only people who win in that is going to be the chemical company. That there'll be a point to where you can't get any more out of it, but how you are able to message that and get it in a way that people understand it is going to be a big challenge. There's also, it's the vocal minority, is that there's oftentimes that people, I'm dying, it smells awful and stuff. And you go to the neighborhood, you don't smell it yourself, and half the neighborhood's out playing in their yard. So, are we going to spend, tens or hundreds of millions of dollars on something that is really only impacting a couple of people where the others are fine with it? What their problem is going to be is when they get our bill in their mailbox every month to pay for this. That's a fine line to walk. And it's really kind of the same one we've been doing on overflows and wet weather management for quite a while.
Right.
It's so hard to quantify a generic term like odors, right?
Yeah.
Too. So what constituents are we talking about? What is that level of diminishing returns? It's just such a difficult thing to navigate.
Yeah, still equity is very important, as Sharon, as you requested. When we construct the odor control facility in DC, we have one in DC, 3 in Maryland, 1 in Fairfax. and one in Loudoun County. And we manage their pay. And most of the other complaints coming from the suburban jurisdiction, because the pipe is 50-mile long, travel time is 4 days, and along the Potomac interceptor, there are restaurants, parking lots, and those complaints are coming from them, and they are the ones who's paying. They are the member of the board also for DC Water. Whenever we have other issue, it's a board issue. Whenever there's no order, nobody even check what I'm doing. So that's how to. It's really important. Regardless, we try to optimize. The suburban jurisdictions, they pay. They don't just want to avoid complaint from their residents. They will pay, and yet we continuously work to optimize our work to reduce energy, to reduce also airflow unnecessarily. Some of our other control facilities, they overlap when they originally were built. We don't have to run them 100%, you know, so we have to reduce that. By making those decisions, we reduce cost on media and energy. But the jurisdiction, they prefer to pay than to receive other complaint from their residents.
Charlie, you had a good point a second ago too. And my next question too is just how do you guys receive complaints? How do you track those? How do you verify the different odor complaints that you have? Do you have different strategies that you use currently with that?
Well, we're changing our strategy because what I found last fall is that the message really wasn't getting to me. We have an answering service that serves the entire city called LexCall here. And by early October, I had 5 complaints around one of our treatment plants. But the council person who represents the district wanted to have a meeting because she's getting tons of complaints. And as it turned out, you know, is that all of this dialogue is going on social media and not necessarily being reported to the city. I think it's kind of like a power outage. One person calls and everybody else complains and stuff. So for us, I mean, that's one of the things we're trying to figure out, and hopefully using the consultant that we've hired, similar to what Tony mentioned before, is trying to get messaging out there and give people a means to be able to report odor complaints, but in a productive way. We don't want to own every odor complaint in town any more than Louisville does. But what we have learned is that people generally don't report stuff to the city. The conversation seems to go on a lot in social media, and we're going to have to figure out how to plug in on that.
Yeah, what we prefer for the odor report is just we let them call the command center so we can control who's calling and where the location is. Usually we respond within half an hour or an hour, we go and check. But from our experience, that complicates things because sometimes we don't receive the same time or next day. So we have the smart sensor where we can check when there's a breakthrough before anyone reports. We can get that information and be responsive before it's complained.
What type of sensor is that?
Smart Cover Sensor is a company that's providing us. And before that, we used to do routinely take sample from the exhaust, send it to a lab and check before really someone complains. Yeah, when the breakthrough starts, we immediately change the media. And to expedite the media change, we have an IDIQ contract. We have a contractor ready to respond within like 2-3 days. Even we have at this time, we have one media amount stored in our storage here. So we need also labor to replace the media.
I think that's one of our biggest challenges is determining where's the actual smell coming from. It's not always the wastewater treatment plant. And because we don't own every single sewer, we serve 28 communities. They all own their own storm sewers. They all own their own sanitary sewers, which feed into our regional sewers. We've had occasions where we're getting odor complaints and we get a crew out there and it turns out it's rotting meat in a dumpster outside of some place, that it was that bad that it was permeating everywhere. so that's a big challenge is getting somebody out there fast enough. And sometimes the smells go away within 10 minutes, 15 minutes. They're not there for a long time. We also have Lake Michigan right here at our doorstep, and Lake Michigan has nuisance algae occasionally called Cladophora. When that washes up on the shore and starts to rot in the sun, it smells like sewage and bad. So we need to track those things down too. And part of every communication I have with people that call, I get most of the calls that come into the district here, is I always try to remind people that, you know, call us as soon as you notice it so we can get somebody out there right away to determine if it's us or if it's maybe something else close by that we can help correct that. But we occasionally just don't have the time or resources to get somebody there quickly, which hurts our efforts. We want to also tell people, as I was saying earlier, that to cover up all of the open air tanks at our facilities is going to be tens of millions of dollars. And that's going to take away from our efforts to also keep our existing infrastructure working properly and aging infrastructure. You guys all know how that works, but it's a huge financial commitment that people just do not understand. And that's where we need to come in as communication people and help people understand what a big financial impact that's going to have.
The covering of the tanks, you know, aside from the financial part of it, the exposure to corrosion, especially in those tanks that are concrete, is a huge issue as well. Last
And
year, we
maintenance,
had to uncover many of our channels at our oldest plant because the concrete had deteriorated to the point to where we were afraid they were going to fall in. So here we are, we're running in the fall during low flow, having all this stuff sandblasted with no odor control whatsoever. So one of the things I want, you know, oh, you just need to cover the tanks. That'll last for a while, but eventually that will catch up to you.
And it hurts your maintenance efforts. That you got to get cranes in to lift those things off, and it's very time consuming, and it's less you can do for other maintenance.
Where you have
very,
where
very
you have
interesting
36
point.
primary clarifiers you're talking about covering. I mean, it's a lot.
Right.
Sorry, Yasir, I didn't mean to talk
Yeah,
over
it's a
you.
very interesting point you mentioned about corrosion. We successfully avoided odor. We are very proactive. We have the sensors. As we discussed earlier, we don't get odor all over the place. We're only 6 locations because we're pulling foul air from upstream and downstream miles away, and we push through the 6 odor control facilities. If we have breakthrough, we have odor only in 6 places out of the 50-mile long pipe. The problem is when we move air with higher speed, higher velocity is proportional to corrosion. That's what the model is telling us. So we're trying to reduce the velocity we're pulling to get this air out of the system. So to reduce that, we have to do the ventilation control, the differential pressure testing. So we have to run them minimally. And even recently, hydrogen sulfide is higher when the temperature is above 60. So we start to shut off all odor control facilities when the temperature is less than 60. So we avoided odor, but our corrosion has exacerbated because of the action we take to remove odors from the system.
And Mr. Parrott, earlier, you mentioned too about some of the unintended consequences of taking in a lot of those calls and a lot of those odor complaints. You want to expound on that a little bit too, and just how you guys are handling that as well?
Yeah, you know, we have always been a part of we are a part of a metro government as well, even though we're completely distinct and separate entity. The metro government, either 311 or 411 system, where, you know, complaints come in and then they get sent out to various organizations and departments. Odor complaints would come in through metro government, and then we would probably get them a day or two later. And like someone else said earlier, by the time you respond, there's nothing there. So as a part of our outreach program 2 years ago, what we said was, here's our number. Here's the number we want you to call. It's allowed us to be more responsive in terms of being more real time. And then we also have been able to, in our responses, particularly in those areas, hotspot areas or frequent flyer areas, to develop more of a personal relationship with certain folks so that we know when it's happening. What we're finding in, particularly in a combined sewer system inside our urban core, a lot of the odors are occurring around 11 or 12 o'clock at night, between 11 and 12 o'clock to almost 6 o'clock in the morning. So that's more of a atmospheric issue where folks are smelling it sooner or more than other parts of the city. And so, but that helps us as we work with our consultants to figure out, okay, not only how are we dealing with catch basins, how are we dealing with odor at the treatment plant, but how are we going to be adjusting our chemical dosage throughout the entire collection system, and how are we going to be able to deal with some of the ventilation issues that we've never really done a whole lot of that before in the collection system. How are we going to be able to do that and get that H2S out of the system and get it into odor control? And right now, the biggest issue that we have is folks that are the ones that on the social, I think Charlie mentioned the social media piece, and those that are just calling every day just because they know the number and they're telling their neighborhood or they're telling their social groups, everybody call MSD, when really the issue is more in one area, but you've got people from all over the county calling. And it's hard to really get a good measure on how bad the issue is, because when you expose and open yourself up and the unintended consequence there is, you've asked people to call and now they're doing it. So now you're being labeled as, non-responsive, or you're the bad guy because you're getting all these complaints. And I think somebody else said earlier that once it reaches your board or once it reaches your political folks, it becomes a bigger issue for you as an organization and as leadership of an organization. So there's a lot of unintended consequences just by trying to do the right thing. So.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for that.
To Tony's point there is, I have like 5 or 6 people that I call my noses that they communicate with me directly. And I've kind of allowed them in because they've demonstrated that they're rational. They don't give you the irrational, oh my God, it's terrible kind of thing. They give you an honest assessment of it. And I live fairly close to one of the plants, and so I can get over there quickly, not so much the other one. But even with them, I go over there, I show up in their driveway at 12:30 at night, and it's like, well, now it's gone. So it's like chasing a ghost sometimes.
Yeah. And not to mention the fact the media that gets involved with this. I think, Charlie, just so you know, we got a call last week from the Kentucky Investigative Reporter section. I don't NPR or one of those groups that has the Central Kentucky Investigative Reporters, and they wanted to come in and do a ride along and see what we're doing about odors. And so when you get the media involved with this, it exacerbates it even further, because all they're trying to do is to get a short, succinct story and a headline. And it's not something that you can explain in a headline or in one story. I mean, it's that complex. And that's another challenge that we have as public utilities, is dealing with the media as well.
Well, one thing that we did, I gave a fairly lengthy presentation to the city council last month, and we recorded the entire thing and put it on YouTube. Because you're right, the media will take the part that they will entertain their viewership and not necessarily give you the other part. Because if they gave them the other part about the things that we are doing and the challenges we're handling, that actually would help us. They just won't do that. It's incumbent on us to do that instead of counting on them.
Right.
That really takes me to maybe the next question for the group, and that really gets at how do you best reach out to the public, and to what are some of the outreach strategies that you found to be effective, and What has worked in terms of, educating the public on odor issues and the control strategies and the things you are doing?
That's a
Yeah, we
really,
have, uh,
go ahead.
yeah, we have an interesting program. We have an annual stakeholder outreach meeting. So once a year, stakeholder from Maryland, stakeholder from Virginia, we call them, they meet with us in person. It is a 4 hours program. We present our programs, then we go out to a site visit. And the advantage from this program, we know person to person who's going to complain, what's the agency, where to report, and we increase their confidence in what we're doing. So they know what we're doing, and sometimes there's no surprise for them if something happens. So this stakeholder outreach meeting, we did it for 6th time, and in May and June, we're going to do 7th time.
Bill, did you have something else you wanted to share on that?
No, I was just going to say that's a huge challenge today because where people get their information is so fractured now. If you have a social media team, it's a really good idea to track various sites, whether it's Nextdoor, even Facebook. But you have to ask permission to get into some of those groups to be able to monitor them. And then they get a little more tight-lipped if they know you're monitoring them. So dealing with the media is for me not a big deal at all. I used to be a reporter for 12 years, and I've always found that if you're honest and transparent, have a good reputation with them, you're going to be treated fairly, and that's all I ask for. No smear pieces. It's hard for TV to tell a big story like we all want it done, because you only have a minute to a minute 30 for your piece that night on the air. You can't do anything in a minute 30 to explain what we as an industry do. It's very, very difficult. So having written communications with visuals, I found very effective. I want to go back to what a couple of people have said, which I find to be my most powerful tool. If you have someone who's really on your case, I've gone to, and I know Pat's done this as well. I give them my personal cell phone number, my work cell phone, because I am the media contact. I'm on call 24/7, 365. And I'll say, hey, you know what? I need to get somebody out there right away. So here's my number. If you have a problem, if you have a question, any concern, you call me. And I'm, pleased to do it during a normal time, hopefully. But I've taken calls at some pretty odd times of the day too. But it's usually short and sweet. And I found that the more time I spend talking with people on the phone, they almost 99% of the time they come away with, oh, thank you so much. I can't believe that I didn't know that, and two, that you took the time to explain it to me. But that's hard to do when, our district alone, we have 1.1 million people. I can't talk to all of them for an hour at a time.
Yeah, we have
Jamie,
an advantage of being a little bit of a smaller community than some of the rest of you do and stuff. But I will add is that we're really trying hard to get in with the homeowners associations of the areas that seem to be the primary complaints, because the HOA can be a means for you to get that information out through the social media in a less threatening way than the government, as you pointed out, monitoring their site.
what we're doing here in Louisville, we've actually developed a public service announcement that is running on local TV stations. And, that's going to be tweaked as we get into the odor season in June. But we are also developing monthly updates that we send to our political body, to our stakeholder groups, so that they are getting a written document from us. And we are also attending the town hall meetings that each of our council districts are having, really in the hotspot areas as well, where we actually are on the agenda, where we give an update to the community on what we're doing regarding odor control mitigation. And then, of course, there's the regulatory aspect of where we actually go to every air pollution control district board meeting, whether we're on the agenda or not, to try to give a monthly update to them as well. So I think someone said it earlier, we've got to be our own mouthpiece. And so you're going to have to get on social media. You're going to have to show up at the public meetings. You're going to have to create your own content and send it out to people. And you're going to have to do PSAs, and you're going to have to do a lot of foot traffic in terms of dealing with those hotspot areas, because if you don't, somebody else is going to feel that noise or feel that messaging for you if you're not doing it yourself.
So number one rule in PR is tell your story first. Don't let somebody else tell a story about you that you then have to come out and potentially look like you're just being defensive and reacting instead of maybe you were doing that the whole time anyways. Always tell your story first and get it out there.
I'm curious to know, Tony, what you've said a couple of times that you own all the odors because of your messaging, because you've been so proactive. Is there any key takeaways that you have from how to draw that line? Is it in educating the public on what this wastewater odor is versus perhaps the scent of the asphalt plant in the neighboring community? I wonder, it's that get out in front of the message, but then you've said to us several times now they're all our odors. And I just was wondering if you guys could elaborate a little bit more on that.
Yeah.
Sorry, Jamie, I'm asking them questions, but
No, you're good.
That's all good.
No, you make a very good point. In fact, as I said, we're going to have to tweak some of our previous PSAs and some of our previous messages to be more specific, to say, okay, is the odor coming from inside your house? Is the odor smell like a chemical? What does it smell like? What is it, rotten egg, or is it something else? So we're going to have to now devise, sort of a check the block thing so that we get more feedback from people when they call us, so we can educate them to say, well, if it's coming from inside your home, it's probably some other remedy that you're looking for. Or if it smells like chemicals, it's probably not sewers. Or, if it smells like bad bacon, maybe it's coming from JB Swift. So those are the type of things that we're going to have to tweak as we are now working with the community and with the media as well.
I got to say, that sounds pretty intimidating, Tony. I mean, we've had that on a smaller scale where, we advertise a little bit that we may have odors here. And then, like you said, we bought all the odors in that area for a while. That's gone away for us. But now, you're being more proactive in how do you try to buy just your odors?
It's tough because, like I said, we've already bought all the odors. Now you've got to kind of dial it back and get folks, kind of focused in on what is impacting you in your particular neighborhood or house. One of the things that the fine line on it also is, particularly as you deal with the air pollution control district, they're wanting you to, if it's coming out of the sewers, you own it. It's your problem. Okay. And then there's the industrial sector that are also impacting odors that are coming out of the sewer system as well. And as you start to tighten up your enforcement on industries in your pretreatment program, you could be impacting some major heavy hitters in your city and politically, especially in the world of bourbonism. We have very large distilleries in our city that we know they're impacting us from a loading standpoint, and they're impacting us from a spent grain standpoint. We could hit them hard, but it's going to be costly to them, and then it's going to also probably necessitate or precipitate some calls to their political stakeholders. And so, there has to be a balance on how you're dealing with industrial impacts, and also how you're dealing with the impacts that are in your system and how you're controlling it. So it's a very, very complex issue.
We've had quite a few issues recently with pretreatment companies, and it's gotten a little ugly with some of the politicians who aren't always straight with people on what's going on. And, you know, everybody likes to point the finger at us right away. And we got called into a meeting, and we were getting beat up pretty bad. And I finally said, look, we don't give occupancy permits out. That's done by the city or village. Then we come in, and after the city says, yeah, this is an acceptable business, then we'll go through the permitting process from our standpoint. But a lot of misinformation, a lot of finger pointing when you have so many different government units who are supposed to be on top of these issues.
Jamie, I want to go on record and ask Tony not to drive up the cost of bourbon, please.
I'll second
Hey,
that too.
you know, we're doing everything we can to be collaborative with our bourbon industries, but I can tell you that there's a significant impact to our treatment plants and a significant impact to our system, and somehow you just got to find that balance, because we support our bourbon distillers, and we also support economic development in our city. So you got to find out a way to do both.
Tony, question for you. The Air Pollution Control District, is that over your entire service area?
We actually serve 3 different jurisdictional counties in Kentucky, but they are only over the Louisville and Jefferson County district that we serve, and they are established under state statute or state partnership with the state Air Quality Control Division, and they do the enforcement locally in the city of Louisville and Jefferson County in Kentucky.
Okay, so they're just enforcement, like they don't own any of the odors. They just enforce on it if enough people call them about it. Is that?
Yeah, they are the enforcement arm for the state.
Yeah, okay. So it's not like they have a overarching plan to address all different types of odors and work with different odor generators, you know, if you will, to make sure they're all being addressed.
I think that I will answer that by saying that through their enforcement and regulatory process, they try to work what I would call, they do have a separate board to where they do enter into what we call agreed orders with either industrial or governmental entities. But those agreed orders, I think, are local. I don't think they're really tied into any type of state law or federal law. It's just an agreed order between, for example, my district or my board and the board that oversees the Air Pollution Control District.
Yeah, makes sense. I guess I was asking that question because by us, there's like nobody really responsible for odors, right? Like you said, we have a DNR that would be an enforcement arm, but there's so many different places that could potentially get involved, but nobody really owns it. Like, hey, I'm going to make sure odors get addressed. And so it's fractured for the public as to who they might call when they, you know, detect an odor that's objectionable.
For all of you, you know, in dealing with your regulators or with the permits that you have that kind of govern your odor control programs, are there specific outreach or education or communication strategies that you've used, or how do you communicate effectively with your regulators about what you're doing and what's working for you?
So as it relates to the Department of Energy and the Environment and the district, that's air quality falls under them. We've actually worked really hard. Salil actually just hopped on this podcast. I don't know if you noticed he joined us there, but we've worked really hard to maintain a very transparent and good working relationship with the individuals who write our permits. And we've really focused our messaging and our meetings with them on full transparency, like many of you had said. And that has worked out really well for us in that we've developed a relationship with our regulators where we can have conversations about why we can or cannot perhaps meet the requirements that they're setting forth. And so we do as much as we possibly can to foster that trust and that integrity and maintain it. So we're often having meetings with our permit writers to discuss issues. It's a little bit different from what you have all talked about, though, because in DC, and again, this is specific to Blue Plains because I'm in DC, we are required to get these permits to construct and operate. So if we expand our plant and we actually don't know if there's a need for a particular air permit based on the unit operation, we prepare a letter, we do some potential to admit and emissions calculations, and we share that with the regulators, and then they tell us, yes, it needs to be permitted, yes, it needs this odor control device. We are one of the more unique industrial locations that they deal with in the district because they don't have anyone at our scale. So the thing that we've done, a lot of the messaging you guys have talked about targeting to the public, we've actually targeted specifically with maintaining a good relationship with our regulators, both enforcement and the permit writers. But it sounds like that's really unique that you guys don't have a similar infrastructure where you are.
But I'll say for our air permit issues, we do the same thing. But our air permit enforcement is, none of it is really odor driven. It's, it's your typical air pollutants. We do the same thing. We would run through potential to admit calculations or whatever and have a proactive discussion with them. But when it comes to odors, they're not very involved unless there's a real issue, which in general, the issues, I won't say they're not real, but they're personal more than, an actual pollutant.
We do have, Pat, just to expand on that a little bit, here, the city of Milwaukee has a division called Department of Neighborhood Services, and they're charged with monitoring and responding to nuisance odors. We don't have any jurisdiction to go after nuisance odors for a pre-treater, for example. That would be up to the city, but serving 28 communities, I don't know if all of those have a similar agency within their village or city. So it gets tricky. Here in Wisconsin, we don't have that one group that everybody knows about that, oh, there's an odor, let's call them. Right now, that's us. As people have said a couple times now.
Yeah, and for us here in Lexington, although we're in Kentucky, just like Louisville is, we're treated differently. We don't have an air quality unit that controls the county. Instead, we deal with the state regulatory folks, and they're not equipped to handle nuisance odors at all. They have tried to, because they've been trying to be responsive to the escalating complaints that started last fall. But they basically keep calling me and asking me to help them so those people won't call them anymore. That's pretty much all I get out of them.
Yeah, this new rule that I've referred to at the start, this section 903 of their chapter 9, which is specifically odorous and other nuisance pollutants, falls under the enforcement part of air. So we've been starting some of these conversations, like I had said about the dilutions to thresholds, how it concerned us that there was this language and this metric now in a rule. But it's so new, we don't know how that's going to transpire yet. As I said, we're all sort of preparing our plans and figuring out what the next steps are.
Can I ask a quick question? How many people on this call today are experiencing what I refer to as growing pains, where our treatment plant in Milwaukee has been there since 1925. And as more condos and more apartments and more businesses start popping up closer and closer to the plant, we're getting more complaints.
I would say in Lexington, it's a combination of both. Yeah, we've had one treatment plant that's been there since 1918. And we're surrounded by, new stuff that's redeveloped, particularly in Lexington, because we have that urban service boundary concept I mentioned at the beginning, that prevents sprawl. And so we get a lot of redevelopment going on within the urban core, and that's right next to the treatment plant. At our other plant, it's been some of that, but it's also, we've got some process problems there that have popped up over the last year that's contributing to that as well. But we do have very, very close by neighbors in probably the more affluent part of the county that didn't realize that they bought a house within a mile of a treatment plant. They had no idea we were even there, but they do now, unfortunately.
Yeah, I would offer that we're seeing it in both places in the urban core of our city because of just the age of our largest treatment plant falling apart basically, and all the monies that we're putting in that plant to sustain it and keep it going. It's more of a environmental justice concern for the neighbors and the communities in those parts of our city. In the more rural areas that have grown over the last 20 to 30 years, to Charlie's point, some folks, some developers had no idea that there was a treatment plant in their community, and now that we've seen an explosion of growth, now they want to complain about the odors coming from the treatment plant, even though the treatment plant's probably been there 50 years or 40 years. So it's an issue that we're dealing with, and for those more rural plants, it's better to deal with homeowners associations and go directly to them, because it's better to get your own story out to those areas than it is to rely on a politician or to rely on the media to tell your story.
So as you guys think about, or as we reflect on a number of the topics we've talked about today, what are maybe some for other utilities across the country as they're, working through some of the similar issues? What are some of the key lessons learned that you guys would pass on to others? I would say it would have been a key takeaway for you in your odor control journey.
Well, I'll start. I mean, one of the things that I'm really trying to focus on is better data collection that is able to demonstrate what is a problem and what isn't. When our stuff really ticked up last October, I mean, I felt like I was kind of flying blind, because they're saying it stinks. I don't think it stinks, but at the same time, I don't have any data that really benchmarks whether it does stink or it doesn't stink. So I'm trying to be more proactive with and productive with our monitoring program, because number one, it tells me that whether or not we've got problems, or at least indicates a trend, but also that when other people see that, they sense that you're more intentional about trying to do something about it. And a lot of that is that perception, is that if they don't see it, then they figure, well, you just don't care and you're not doing anything. Secondly is that in hiring our program manager, that I want them to emphasize on our messaging as well. As Bill, I think, said earlier, is that tell your story first. We haven't done a very good job of that, and we need to do a better job in having the consultant, who is an odor control expert. I am not. I'm a water guy, not an odor guy. Be able to be more proactive in telling them what we're doing. Because I think the majority of the population, they kind of get it. They just don't watch it all the time. They don't see what we do, and they don't know. And for them to understand better the complexity of trying to be able to deal with the problem and improve people's quality of life, along with what they can see as a concerted effort to accomplish that, 80% of the people will be satisfied with that. The other 20% you're probably never going to make happy. So work on the 80%.
Yeah, I'll chime in a little bit. I agree with everything you said there, Charlie, except I'm not sure about the 80-20. I think you're mostly right, but I also think sometimes the loud person that you say, I can convince them and I can get through to them. I think sometimes it's worth it to do that, and they can also spread the word then to the other. If you get the vocal majority or the vocal one to be on your side, that goes a long way. And I know sometimes it works, it doesn't always. So you do got to be careful, but otherwise I agree with what you said, the proactive, the get your message out first, and, regular communication, especially like Bill said, on the phone or face to face, to me has been the best. But I see there's a need to also put that out to the wider audience. And like Bill said, you can't talk to a million people. How do you translate what you can tell one person into a good general message that you can get out to everybody? That's still a challenge.
I think my biggest lesson learned is if someone calls and they're really, really mad, it's not a good idea to say, well, we're not cleaning roses. I've actually used that a time or two jokingly, but just to cut the ice. Yeah, we have a 6-lane highway that goes over one of our plants, and we continually get people saying, what is that smell when I drive over that bridge? And that's where I came up with that phrase, because the media called me one day and the guy was being a real jerk. And I just said to him, well, we're not cleaning roses, dude. And that's where I think it's even bigger challenges is if people can't realize that they're smelling sewage when they're driving over a wastewater treatment plant, how do we get them to recognize what they may be smelling in their own neighborhood that may or may not be sewage? And I don't know how you tackle that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I never try to be glib with people, because you next thing you know, you're on the news or you're in the newspaper and stuff like that. Yeah, but sometimes you have to shake your head and just kind of bite your lip, because it's like, really? Here at that old treatment plant that I mentioned before, there's an element of folks who want to build a bike trail right through the middle of the plant, right next to the chlorine building. We have 12 tons of gaseous chlorine stored right in this building, and we're going to send bicycles next to it. The logic of that is beyond me, but I don't say what I really think about it.
You know, I think from my perspective, from a takeaway perspective, that I could share with other utilities is that we know that odors are innate in what we do with wastewater treatment. And we know that we could throw a lot of money at the problem, but there's always going to be odors in the wastewater system. And so how do we effectively communicate that to our ratepayers and our stakeholders? The second takeaway I've got is that, you know, when you're doing major capital investments, make sure you include odor control as a part of that initial round of scope and improvement, because in the end, you're going to have to come back and do it anyway. The third takeaway I have is that, you know, when you do be proactive in your messaging, and I think I said this before, you're going to end up owning odors. And so now we have to be a little more strategic on how we're doing our outreach. And even though we were trying to be responsive to an influx of odor complaints over the last couple of years, we jumped to try to find out quick solutions so we could communicate those solutions. And we left out a lot of analysis of the problem and the complexity of the problem and what we needed to be doing additionally. And now we got to manage expectations as we go forward, because there's a lot of things that we should be doing, both in the collection system and at the treatment plants. It's going to cost a lot of money and it's going to take time. And that's the big hurdle that I'm facing here in Louisville now, is managing expectations and keeping the perceptions that we care.
And
So I go next. Yeah, sorry.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. Yes.
I go next. Yeah, our big take or lesson from what we've been doing last 6-7 years is, as mentioned earlier, to be proactive, and this includes also continuously optimizing your system, improving your media performance, and having detection sensors all over the place to have early detection, you know. And finally, to have, importantly, outreach program with identified customers. So you have to know who are the people who complain usually, park goers or restaurant owners, you have to have communication with them, and that's our big intake. It's not a one-time thing. It requires continuous improvement, improving your maintenance, response time, and as I said, media performance also is very important. Thank you.
Thank you. Shauna, did you have any lessons
So I
learned?
just feel lucky that my campus is fairly isolated, and I have
Mhm.
great people like Iyasu that get to manage the communication side of things. One thing I do, we obviously have lots of folks that come to Blue Plains. They're very interested. When I do get sort of pushback related to the odor, I always try to flip it and to talking about what a great service we do, right? So I take them to our outfall and I show them how clean the water is, and I compare it to our tap water. And I say we're the largest point source in the Potomac, but we contribute less than 1% of nitrogen, to sort of say, like, this is the nature of what we do, and we're really environmental stewards, and we're doing the best we can. Like, that's sort of the language that I say when we have folks from the Sierra Club or Greenpeace come through and they're physically here talking about how can you use all these chemicals or all this carbon? And I try to spin it to like see the impact we're having, at the end of the day, to the Chesapeake Bay and the Clean Water Act. The other thing I would say, and it's been different for us because we do have this regulatory component and we have this relationship, is just be transparent, but very careful and nuanced in your language. Because I think that's really important, and make sure that you have similar messaging throughout the organization. I think that's important as well. Between, we sort of live on an island here at the plant sometimes, but we want to always make sure that we have similar messaging when we are talking with the other groups and we're approaching the problem the same way. So
That's great. Well, I think we've covered a lot of great topics here, just talking through, some of the technical solutions, going into a lot of the different, communication strategies and public outreach strategies, and what's been most effective for all of you. So again, thank you all for just your expertise and your time today with that. And I just open it up. Any final comments, any final statements that you all like to make before we wrap up?
I want to thank everybody too. I mean, we've learned some things that we can talk about here. And an opportunity to discuss this with other utilities is a great thing. So I really appreciate that you rounded us all up and gotten us together. And thanks for letting us participate.
Likewise.
Well, I do want to, thanks to Ms. English and Mr. Parrott with MSD, as well as the utility management community for really making this happen, and for pulling everyone here together. So thank you again with that. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Zanetta to close this out.
Thank you, Jamie. Again, I want to thank you, each one of you, for your time and input and your expertise. Jamie, I want to thank you for being a great facilitator, and certainly last but not least, Mr. Tony Parrott, who's the executive director for MSD, whose vision we've been trying to make come to fruition and also tell our story. Thank you, everyone.